before we actually get started, I don't know how, it's kind of surprising to me that we're in Nashville, we're on a stage, and not one person has asked, Nashville, how are y'all doing? So if y'all would just kind of humor me, a mild woo will suffice. I just want to do this once in a lifetime thing. Nashville, how are y'all doing today? Oh, much better than mild. I appreciate it. All right, so before I let these gentlemen introduce themselves, for those that don't know me, I'm Carlo Viray. I'm the Director of Growth at Rise 8. I am really excited to host this Fireside Reflection, though, because as a former government program manager and software product leader, I found myself very much at the intersection of acquisitions, requirements, and operations, dealing with that friction, intentional and unintentional friction, and often dealing with a lot of chaos. So I'm excited to kind of see and hear from Paul and JJ how they're approaching that. We had 2 great talks on value stream mapping and system modernization, which I think is a tale as old as time in the government, especially when it comes to software delivery and transformation. And really what we want to focus here on is how do we think about bringing the mission closer to software delivery, and how do we think about bringing software delivery closer to the mission? So with that, Paul, JJ, if you don't mind, just briefly introduce yourselves, your role, and maybe one thing that you're hoping that the audience can take away from what you're about to share with us today.
Yeah, sure. So, hey, good morning, everybody. So, Paul Contoveros, career space operators, as Brian mentioned. I'm probably, I'm the least likely person to be here, frankly. So, I got a degree in criminology. So, of course, the Air Force made me a space operations officer. So that was fun. Learning how to become a space operations officer was interesting with my background, but thankfully Air Force training is excellent, and even this knucklehead was able to figure out how to fly satellites. Across my career, it's been interesting to see this tension between ops and acquisitions, right? Like as an operator, I'm needy. I want it now, I want it fast, I want it accurate, I want it lethal, I want all these things. And growing up as an operator, when we start early in our careers having touch points with the acquisitions community, we don't know how acquisitions, software, the DoD software acquisition pathway, DevSecOps, Agile, Kubernetes, operators don't know any of that shit, and they don't care. They don't. They just want the product. So from an operator's point of view, starting off in this directorate and being basically the first person to be in the Directorate of Innovation before we became the Combat Force Enhancement branch, my learning curve was just steep, But the proof in the pudding is that if a knucklehead with a criminology degree from a land-grant college can get this, then I think anybody can. And I think we're going to talk a little bit later about some of those cultural things. And I think one of the great things about Colonel Homan and I, him having acquisitions background, being really sound at engineering. I'm an INTJ, intuitive guy. I just make gut decisions. He keeps me grounded. And basically, the first integrated mission Delta was this office. And it's worked really, really well. So I'll turn it over to JJ, because he's really the brains behind the operation.
No, Paul, you're too kind. Welcome, everyone. Appreciate being here. Like Paul said, our office has gone through a lot of learning. Background on me, acquisitions, ops analyst. Sometimes I joke that I'm the acquisitions guy in the division. But bringing back to Carlo, what you asked about, like, what do you hope kind of get out of this conversation? I really believe that there's kind of a lot of tension, like Paul said, between acquisitions, ops, and industry, right? And I've been a little bit on all sides of that, seen some of the tension. And I really believe that events like this coming together, where we can have open conversation, really talk about some of the issues, and kind of grow together, be more empathetic, be more understanding. That's going to get us where we need to go. So beyond all the the buzzwords and agile software development, like it's more about all working together as a cohesive team. And so that's what kind of is the theme of. We're going to share some challenges, some things that we've gone through that helped us to get where we are today. But we're hoping that you take away some of that and realize that we have to be thinking about everyone as like, hey, you're a partner in this, not like, okay, I have to write a contract, you do what I say. There's too much of that going on. So we really need to flip the script on that.
Cool. So we have a very diverse audience here today. A lot of people probably not from the Space Force, not from defense. So maybe it would be helpful if you just kind of set a little bit of context about like, what are the missions that you support today? And like, as your organization, like how are you supporting them?
Yeah, sure. So it's interesting. There are 5 mission areas in the Space Force. We've just updated that. Some of you may be familiar with some of our mission sets like MILSATCOM, GPS, we have missile warning radars. What's been great under the reorganization of SPOC is that now we were an outside organization as the Directorate of Innovation, but now under Combat Force Enhancement, we are with all the mission area owners. And so that progression has just changed everything for us, because now one of our biggest pain points, and you wouldn't believe this, one of our biggest pain points is codifying pain points. If you ask an operator, what do you need? They're not gonna give you anything worth shit. You have to almost tell them, you have to bring them to the well and be like, I think you need something like this, right? I didn't know that, it took time, so now I think that approach has been working, at least it's starting to work.
Yeah, awesome. So you mentioned a little bit like the pain points. Kind of this will lead into a lot more of the discussion and your examples of how you're solving them, but like, what are some of those biggest challenges or the bottlenecks that you're seeing that have led you to structure your organization in a way to solve the problems that you're trying to solve now?
Well, some was external, some was internal. So as part of the realignment, we lost about half of our manning. So we were forced to focus in, and that was a good thing, I think, because we've been playing whack-a-mole with all kinds of different things, right? We've got industry telling us, we've got this great thing for you, academia, we can do a study, we've got grant money. There's no way to juggle 1,000 things at once, right? And so when we were pared down, now we get to be laser focused on software development and delivering capability to the warfighter. And we do that through our combat enhancement teams, which are essentially Rise 8 software developers. Rise 8 is our contractor. Can't imagine why. JJ was here last year at Prodacity. He came back all fired up and energized, and we were lucky to get into this partnership, I think, because what we're trying to do, so it's not about the bottlenecks necessarily in the organization. What we're trying to get after for every single one of our mission areas is closing the gap between capability and threat. So imagine an XY axis, right? Threat over time, 45-degree angle, but you get stuff delivered here, and then maybe here, but the threat keeps going and your capability doesn't. Our job is to close that gap, and the easiest, fastest, most impactful way is doing what we're doing here, right? Getting after the ones and zeros in the code, because it doesn't matter how much Gucci shit we have on orbit, if you don't have the data and you can't exploit the data, there's no point.
Yeah, so you mentioned like closing the gap between the capability and the threat. This kind of topic of around like success and like how do you know that you're achieving success? Karen brought up in her talk, success isn't always success, and it's thinking about from like a larger system or enterprise perspective. So what are those like key indicators of success or those metrics for you? We talked about the mission metric that matters yesterday. How do you know that you are effectively closing the gap between capability and threat?
JJ's probably got a good answer for this, but the real quick answer, you know what, I'm gonna shut up and just let JJ answer. Never mind.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this from after Doug's conversation yesterday, we talked about ROI and like how do we say what we're doing matters, right? Just fundamentally being in the government, we are one of the, as a government, we don't make money, right? We spend money. So trying to say like, hey, I made this much money by spending this much money, it doesn't really work. So we can try to do some extrapolation, do techniques like that. But to be honest, I prefer simple. I prefer just going down to the lowest level and understanding like, hey, what the problems really are and walking that dog. So value stream mapping, talking about like Karen brought up, right? Mm-hmm. I love value stream mapping. So I'm a system engineer background, systems thinker at heart. You see me post some of the things on there. I really the light bulb kind of hit me with a lot of the conversations is, I think systems thinking and systems engineering is kind of fell flat with thinking like we just understand the system, right? Or like almost admiring it, right? That's not useful unless you actually do something about it, right? So I almost want to start preaching mission engineering, missions thinking, where it's like, okay, great, I understand the system, but how do I actually optimize it, understand that value stream? So just giving an example of like, okay, well, what metrics are you looking for, right? So we're not trying to do like, set out like, hey, we'll have 20 apps this year, that kind of thing, right? Because the apps are useless, then what have we done, right? So we're really thinking about for the kind of the outcome. So I'll give you an example of walking the dog, kind of a value stream mapping approach. And this is a shout out to the, one of the Del 2 units, 15 SPSS out in Maui. Some of the guys are out here. And then some of the teams that have worked on this project. It's called the MOS tool. So really layman's level version from JJ. It's basically a scheduling tool for some of the optical telescopes out in Maui. So a lot of this data needs to be collected, and it feeds into other battle management systems, other things that we need to use. A lot of this data was falling flat, or those assets were not being utilized, right? Because they were doing ad hoc, like, hey, I got a spreadsheet here, I got a SharePoint there, I got, talk to this guy, and you may get some time on the system. So the proposal was, hey, we probably need something to do that's better, right? But better is kind of in the eye of the beholder. So they did some, actually got some teams out there to really understand the workflows, understand like, what do you guys do right now? What is value? What is just wasted, back and forth stuff? So through that, they started kind of mapping out like, hey, this takes this long, right? This is how much, if we had more time to not do scheduling, we could do more time using the assets, right? So I won't go into the details of how they came up to this, but just kind of, believe me, they were able to articulate, hey, we could get it up to an increase in 20% more space domain awareness time and collections by just optimizing this system. And then if you start doing some things like, hey, let's take that a little step further. Let's monetize things like, rather than, opportunity costs, rather than buy a new telescope, right? Which is kind of a lot of times we always think like, I need new weapon systems. I need new, monolithic efforts. Sometimes you just need to make the thing you have a little bit better, right? So we were able to monetize that. I know it's a little estimation kind of things, right? It's not, you could pick it apart and say, oh, I don't know, I don't believe that number exactly. But we're able to see and walk the dog of like, this could save us up to $5 million a year versus doing something else, right? Versus just buying another telescope. So these are real tangible things, and we're constantly looking for those. Those like, hey, let's not try to turn this into some ridiculous number that no one understands, 82%, like a better, right? Let's try to understand those workflows, and value stream mapping is a great way to doing that.
Yeah, you mentioned the thing that Joe first in his presentation said was take the systems that you have now and then figure out how to incrementally modernize it. So you're kind of re-emphasizing that. You mentioned of like what this team was able to accomplish and the metrics that they achieved, but like how did you even get to the point, if you think back a little bit further of like how did you identify this was the thing to tackle? When you're actually prioritizing across all of Space Operations Command and all the different deltas, what do you put your resources against? And then why are you going to tackle that in the first place? So like, what's that process look like in your organization? Like, how are you doing that?
Yeah, so this kind of goes back to I think to really understand how we've gotten to where we are today, right? Paul brought up frankly, at some points we were doing a little bit of whack-a-mole, like, hey, that looks like a problem, let's go fix that, right? I can't remember how the quote goes, but I love the quote of like, optimizing basically something that shouldn't exist in the first place is the most useless thing to do, right? So we've had to learn a lot through the School of Hard Knocks, and I've loved that we've been a learning organization since day one. I got here about 2.5 years ago. Paul was, honestly, he used to be my support contractor. Now he's my boss. So for anyone that has a CETA, a support, treat them well, right? They could become your boss someday, right? Always treat everyone with respect, right? So when I got there, and Paul admits, like, there was a lot like, hey, we're the innovation director. What does that mean, right? I honestly, I dislike how we as a country use innovation. We keep saying it, but without context, it's meaningless, right? So when I got there, it's kind of trying to give some examples of how we got to this place where we, I think we're now performing with like, with more focus and all that. It took some learning. So, a lot of learning, right? So, and we had to be willing to fall on our faces to like, hey, that's not working, let's do something differently. So from like a software delivery point of view, how we kind of got to this place, initially, we were very much more like, hey, let's hire a team, let's kind of go out there, hunt and feel, hear about some problems, and then that sounds reasonable, let's go, figure it out, right? There wasn't like a lot of value stream mapping, there wasn't that kind of thing. We would get ideas from the force. Love the Supercoder program. Some really great ideas out there. But what we were really struggling with kind of like enabling and sponsoring things, but we weren't necessarily owning the problem, and we weren't owning the solution. We were like kind of this enabling organization. I really think we've kind of shifted, and we're still growing into this, right? I know software factory word kind of gets like, oh my God, you're gonna become huge and all those things. Like, I think a software factory, there's a guy at Platform One, it goes by Shifty, he said something in a brief that I really liked. He said, software factory is really as an acquisition decision. It's a way of doing business. If you think of it as like, well, it's the nuts and bolts of all my factory, right? I think you're thinking about it wrong. So I think any organization, this isn't just an acquisition thing necessarily. Operations and any organization can do this type of thing. So we've gotten to a place now where it's like, all right, the team out at Maui brought the idea to us that, hey, we have some challenges here, and they were able to kind of articulate. At that point, to be honest, this example, they had already been doing some of the work, so they were able to show us some of that return on investment. It's like, hey, this is a good project. This has tangible value, right? And we're trying to kind of make that more the standard, where we get a lot of good ideas or a lot of problems brought to us, and we start methodically going through like, okay, how do we kind of rack and stack, right? But if all you hear is like, I want an app, right? That gets us nowhere. We shouldn't be starting there right away. Sometimes you don't need an app, right? Like, we always want to focus on building tech without understanding what the problem is. We've kind of lost everything.
And that's been one of our biggest problems, right? So everything we've done, as we said, we've had to start from scratch. And we don't have the resident expertise in-house, right? Like, I'm not a software person. I've never even heard of value stream mapping when we first started. So we had to learn everything and get to that ramp up. And now, over the course of years, we've convinced people that we have a plan and we know what we're doing. And the generals are behind us, and now we've got an operational planning team that's bringing in all the mission areas to talk to us about codifying the requirements and their pain points. So we're getting some momentum, and that's the real answer now, is that we have a formal mechanism, finally, to capture those pain points, rack and stack them one through N, and then get after them.
Yeah, JJ, you brought up about like how the software factory can belong in kind of any type of organization. And Brian talked at the very beginning also of like a software factory or the people, processes, and technologies that enable continuous delivery of, outcomes in production. You all are effectively kind of executing a brand new model where an operations type organization is like being involved both from an acquisition perspective, but actually doing software delivery. So how are you, what were some of like the points of friction that you kind of came across with like setting that up, and then also collaborating with the traditional acquisitions authority or organizations like Space Systems Command? How have you kind of like tried to bring that together?
I'm sure Paul will have some things to add on to this, but to be honest, like when I first showed up, there's already kind of natural friction. As an acquisition guy, Paul's background is operations. There's just this natural tension, right? So day one, it was almost like, okay, I honestly thought what we were doing was crazy. The idea of like, I came from traditional acquisitions, more waterfall systems, right? Honestly, didn't love all we were doing in that business either, but I was kind of taught a certain way. Like, you get your requirements, you do the thing, you go find money, you get your money cut, you just keep pressing on, right? And you deliver what you were told to deliver. When I showed up, Paul basically said, hey, we have a program and we're funded. And I'm like, to do what? It's like, to do innovation. I'm like, well, what does that mean, right? So we started talking through like, what kinds of innovation? And we realized that we really meant more like digital innovation, more what we've now kind of coined ops enhancements, where it's more focusing on, I would call, generally speaking, outside the weapon systems. Doesn't mean it couldn't be, but like that's where we're focused on, right? The stuff that gets left behind. So he started talking to me about like, hey, we have this money to get after this effort, and to do that, we need people, right? We need teams to get after this and do this well. And we did a lot of learning, but initially I thought it was like heresy. I'm like, what do you mean we don't know what we're gonna deliver? And that's what we're constantly dealing with, right? I'm a big proponent of acquisitions taking, especially when it comes to software intensive systems, getting away from like writing, laborious, the huge spreadsheets, right? Even though I'm a spreadsheet guy, I love spreadsheets, but like that don't tell us anything and that we never will edit, right? They should be living documents to some degree, config controlled, but living documents to understand like, hey, it's what I need to do now, and let's apply the money and the resources to what we want to get done, not what someone a couple of years later thought was a good idea, right? And that's how acquisition is built. So we've been able to just fundamentally, I want to thank Paul in front of everyone. He was fundamental in fighting what is the hardest thing in the government, getting money. And the second hardest thing is not getting your money taken away. So he's been adept at doing that. something that is a skill that can't be taught. It's just, you got what you got. So that's been huge at helping us fight a lot of like constantly educating others and having an open mind of like, hey, we're not just out here just funding teams just to build stuff that doesn't do anything, right?
Yeah.
We're really methodical about it, and we're getting more methodical about it.
Yeah, I'm really excited about where we're headed in the future. I said earlier, you know, like as a captain dealing with acquisitions, you know, we're putting Geo1 on orbit and doing all the testing, and I would just get so frustrated because I would go to the contractor and say, the operators need this on their console. And well, there's no requirement for that, and I didn't understand it at the time. You know, I would just be like, acquisitions, you know. Thankfully, as I've matured and have had more experience, I've learned that, you know, our PEOs, our SMLs, our MLs are good Americans, just like the rest of us. They want mission success, right? I know cost, performance, schedule is paramount, but what they really want is impact. And they have way more requirements than money. I didn't know any of this. Well, they have all the money, right? SSC has billions of dollars, you know? Why can't I get some of that? And so thankfully, maturing over time and seeing how things work, and then having the best IMD on the staff has just completely changed my way of thinking too. And so I don't know if Dave Williams is here. I don't want to throw him under the bus. He's going to be talking later. But he's our acquisitions partner. And we're doing something really cool. We're going to build basically an example application. This is what the operators want. And then we'll go off and build from there instead of handing a requirements document to the acquisitions community that doesn't mean anything. We're going to show them what the operators want. And I'm really excited about that model. I think it's really cool.
Cool. All right, one question, a couple fun questions actually to just wrap this up. If you know, it's the magic wand question. If you had a magic wand, what would be the thing that you'd change? And then I'm going to add this that you weren't prepped for. If you were gonna, if somebody else was about to embark on a very similar journey, what piece of advice would you give them? What is the one piece of advice you'd give them? So those two questions: magic wand and advice.
Want to go first?
Sure, I'll go first. So I thought magic wand, it could be easy. I could money, right? And that's kind of where I was headed. But as part of being here and being part of this thing, I think if I could wave a magic wand and fix something, it would be the mindset, right? When Shaban and Josh were talking about the Dory moment, that we've all had and have to explain ourselves over and over and over and over again, and the value that we bring. If I could just wave a magic wand and everybody just got it, the money would flow, everything would be wonderful. I think that's mine. And I'm sorry, what was the second part?
What piece of advice would you give to somebody that's about to go through a similar journey or experience?
I think what's paramount and what we learned pretty early is that you got to get connected with like-minded individuals who know what they're doing, and you can take their lessons learned. Because starting from scratch without that network is not easy, and it's not fun. JJ?
Yeah. So I'll just kind of say what he initially was going to say. I do think we need money. I would just want more. I know we joke about it, but sayings like put your money where your mouth is, right? So without resources, all you get is a lot of talk. So I'll use an example. I didn't really talk about it earlier, but one of the things that also we were doing when I first got there was a lot of sponsoring a lot of SBR, Small Business Innovation Research prototypes. I love, honestly, what the program could be, but I have some concerns about what it is doing right now, just for the sheer fact, I think everyone shares these, right? It's almost like acquisition gymnastics to figure out how to use that program. It shouldn't be like that. So there's some of those challenges. Also, on top of that, we hear words like I got to bridge the valley of death, right? The fact that there's a valley of death is already a problem, right? That someone has to figure out how to do that, and almost you have to have a superhero power to figure that out.
It's built in.
I've almost started just saying there's a chasm. There's no valley. There's just death, because there isn't this concept of a phase 3, which confuses people. They're like, oh, phase 3, how do we get that money? That's your money. Well, I don't have any money, right? And it becomes this problem area where a lot of good ideas kind of die. So I would like to see things like that, when we talk about innovation, instead of just saying let's do more of it. Most program offices, there's this fallacy of thought that program offices have this humongous slush fund to just do whatever good ideas come. Most of that money's spoken for. I knew my budget, I protected it like a hawk because I had things that needed to get done, right? I've already been told things to do, so you're adding more layers and more requirements isn't helpful. So I like to see what I'm going to call it the sustainment innovation pot. that's there and available, not like you have to figure out how to get it, it's already there for you. You have to prove that you deserve it, like your tech is worthwhile, and start taking some of the shackles of data, IP and all this other stuff. I think a lot of companies need some ability to do things like, magic wand stuff. Not every company wants to sell their widget. Some want to sell them and say like, hey, I want to show that I'm good at I'm like basically like a VC capitalist. Like, kickstart me, let me get off my feet, and then I'll show you what I can do. Then integrate me into the rest of the full. So I think ideas like that, if I could just do massive, PBB reform, I would love that, and a lot more money. Yeah. And what was the second question again?
Oh, yeah, we're out of time, but what advice would you give somebody?
Just go back to what I said earlier. I think events like this are huge to have people come together, keep going after them, keep coming to events like this. I'm going to go back in DTS, that's the government travel system. I think I put this, operations was the reason I'm here. I'm going to put down as therapy. I think this is therapy for all of us, especially acquisition types. We need this. Yeah, I know you agree, right? Where we actually start talking and what the issues are, and we're coming together, as a team.
Cool. Well, thanks, gents.
Yeah, thanks.